The air in the Tennessee River Valley had a unique way of holding secrets, especially the bloody ones. But the events of 1872 were too profound, too surgically executed, to remain local gossip. Imagine the humid heat of a Louisiana summer, 1872. 11 men, all prominent members of the Knights of the White Camellia, the local arm of the Klan, were discovered dead in their beds, their throats opened with surgical precision. This wasn't the work of fever or accident. It was a focused, methodical act. While local authorities scrambled to classify the deaths as unrelated incidents, quietly sealing all records, a different truth began to circulate in the cramped churches and back rooms of the colored sections. It was the whispered, unwritten legend of the woman they called La Vie Noire, the Black Veil. Before we continue with the story of La Vie Noire, a woman whose existence terrified the powerful men who thought themselves untouchable, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this one, stories that were deliberately buried, that powerful men wanted forgotten, these are what we uncover on this channel. Subscribe to The Forgotten Liturgy and tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? The groundwork for this legend was laid 4 years earlier in St. Martin Parish, 1868, a land struggling to come to terms with the end of the war. The town of Breaux Bridge was the parish seat, where the sudden freedom of 4,000 former slaves, who now owned property and voted, protected by federal presence, was viewed by the old planter class as nothing less than the end of civilization. In response, the local elite formed the Knights of the White Camellia. They controlled the courts and the law. They disdained theatrics, preferring surgical tactics like destroying crops or revoking credit, saving calculated violence for those who dared to be intractable. Into this simmering violence, on a Tuesday morning in late April, walked a mystery. A woman who called herself Celeste Dufresne. She stepped off the steamboat from New Orleans with a single trunk and a black silk parasol. She was perhaps 30, with an ambiguous café au lait complexion, and wore morning clothes of expensive cut. Her French was flawless. Her English carried a Parisian accent. She claimed to be a French merchant's widow, looking to purchase property and escape the city's yellow fever. Celeste took a room at the Breaux Bridge Hotel, paying a month in advance with gold coins. Her dignity and self-possession discouraged close questioning. She attended Catholic Mass, took solitary meals reading French novels, and seemed utterly uninterested in the parish's racial politics. Within 2 weeks, the 11 men of the Knights Council had noticed her. It started when Thomas Broussard, a struggling planter, encountered her at the general store. Celeste's focused attention, her subtle smile, and a light touch on his arm left Broussard immediately obsessed. He began finding reasons to be in the hotel lobby, drawn by a quality in her he couldn't quite name, a magnetism that promised both gratitude and a hint of amusement. Thomas Broussard's obsession with Celeste Dufresne intensified. He invented reasons to see her, showing her properties while telling his wife they were necessary business transactions. The drives, the scent of lavender, and her gaze that seemed to see through his careful respectability, consumed his thoughts. The other knights noticed his distraction and quickly began their own pursuit. Antoine Lallier, the lawyer, offered legal services. Dr. Raymond Hebert, the coroner, offered health consultations, and Eugène Fontenot, the dry goods owner, extended generous credit. Celeste accepted each offer with gracious reserve, making each man feel uniquely necessary to her, a respectable woman in difficult circumstances. None of them questioned why a grieving widow would remain in Breaux Bridge without purchasing any property, or why she never seemed to mourn. What they didn't know was that late at night, Celeste sat in her room, adding notes to a leather-bound journal. She recorded each man's vulnerabilities, sins, habits, and the crucial details needed for an attack: where he slept, who guarded his house, and where he kept his weapons. Celeste Dufresne had not come to Breaux Bridge to purchase property. She had come to kill 11 men. The first death occurred on July 19, 1872, during a brutal heat wave. Thomas Broussard was found in his bed, his throat opened from ear to ear with surgical force. The violence of the wound contrasted sharply with the peacefulness of his face. The household servant, Esther, was among the first to enter the room. She noticed details the white authorities missed or chose to ignore. 2 empty wine glasses on the bedside table, a strong smell of lavender and something sweet the bedclothes disturbed from vigorous activity, and clear evidence that Broussard had not been alone. Sheriff Devo and Dr. Haber quickly established the official narrative: murder by an intruder, likely a freedman with a grudge seeking retaliation for the night's cruel actions, such as Broussard personally overseeing the whipping of 3 colored men the previous month for trying to vote. But Esther, cleaning the room, found a single, dark, lustrous hair caught in the floorboards and sheets, stained with more than just blood, evidence of intimacy. She said nothing, only telling the other servants what would keep them safe. Yet in the colored section of town, the true story began to circulate. Whispers about the beautiful, mysterious widow and the convenient timing of the death of a man known for his cruelty. The remaining knights, grim and united in their presence at the funeral, assumed the murders were a declaration of war from the freedmen's community. They never noticed Celeste Dufresne, veiled in black, standing at a respectful distance, her lips curving in a small, satisfied smile. As predicted, Antoine Lallier died on August 9th, found in his office quarters with his throat cut and the same evidence of recent female company. With 2 knights dead in identical fashion, the authorities, who were themselves knights, could no longer maintain the fiction of a random intruder. The whispers in the colored community grew louder. La Vie Noire, they called her now, the Black Widow. The freed people knew what the white authorities refused to acknowledge. Every man she killed had real blood on his hands. Lallier had intimidated witnesses to defend Klan members. Broussard had overseen whippings and arson. The 9 remaining knights held an emergency meeting on August 12th. Judge Théot voiced their chilling conclusion. The killer had to be someone the victims trusted enough to let down their guard, a woman. Mother of God, it's Madame Dufresne, Sheriff Devo finally admitted. But the conclusion brought a terrible problem. Every man in the room had courted her and had secrets he couldn't afford to expose. To investigate her was to invite scrutiny of themselves. Yet beneath the fear, an unsettling current of fascination ran. They couldn't stop remembering her gaze, her touch, the way she made them feel powerful. The discreet investigation began. Telegrams to New Orleans revealed no record of a merchant named Dufresne dying during the epidemic. Her entire past was a fabrication. Hotel staff reported that Celeste's room contained almost no personal effects, but always smelled of lavender. A housemaid named Rachel reported twice seeing Celeste return very late at night through a side door, carrying what looked like a leather medical bag. The knights implemented severe security measures, sending families away, hiring armed guards, varying their routines, and keeping loaded pistols near their beds. They waited, knowing the next death was coming. Dr. Raymond Haber was the 3rd to die, found in his medical office on August 27th, throat cut and his body arranged on his own examination table. The circumstances were identical, but this murder included a chilling new element. Pinned to his chest with a surgical pin were the words, "Remember Baton Rouge." The knights immediately understood the message. In March 1868, Dr. Haber had testified in a federal inquiry into Klan violence, specifically against a colored woman named Sarah Boudreau, whose husband was attacked and home-burned. The surgical precision, the intimate access, the specific targeting, it was all connected. The note pinned to Dr. Hebert's chest, "Remember Baton Rouge," referred to Hebert's false testimony that had helped attackers, including knights, go free in 1868, leading to the later murder of the victim's wife, Sarah Boudreau. The question remained, how did Celeste, a supposed Creole widow, possess such intimate knowledge of Klan crimes? Judge Théot, reviewing old records, discovered that Sarah Boudreau had a 12-year-old daughter who had disappeared after her mother's murder. Théot presented the timeline. Sarah murdered in 1868. Daughter vanished. 4 years later, a mysterious woman appears and systematically kills the men responsible. "She's Sarah Boudreau's daughter. Come back for revenge," Jessup whispered. The theory came with devastating implications. If Celeste was Sarah's daughter, she was colored and had passed as Creole white to seduce them. Every man she had courted had committed miscegenation, a moral stain and a crime under Louisiana law. The scandal would destroy them. 9 men remained in the inner circle. Overriding Judge Teo's legal concerns, Marcus Thibodeau made the brutal suggestion, "We handle this the way we've handled other problems, quietly, permanently." In a vote, the 9 men agreed they would kill Celeste Dufresne tonight. However, the hotel serving girl, Marie, overheard the plan and slipped away to warn the freedmen's community. A message reached Celeste, who smiled. She had expected and counted on their predictable rage. Celeste arranged for a freed woman named Charlotte to board the steamboat the next day, wearing her clothes and veil as a decoy. The real Celeste had never left the parish. She moved into the colored section of town, welcomed as a sister and avenger. The knights, relieved she was gone, had no idea the hunt was far from over. The murders immediately escalated. Eugène Fontenot, the dry goods owner, was found dead in his wagon on September 3rd, his throat cut by a companion he trusted. The note read, "Remember the Fontenot store fire," a reference to the fire Fontenot had ordered that destroyed a competing store opened by freedmen. Next was Philip Rousseau, the banker, found dead at his desk on September 15th, with a note referencing a foreclosure that violated bank policy but was approved because the debtor was colored. 5 men were dead in 2 months. The pattern was unmistakable. Federal authorities finally took notice, sending U.S. Marshal Holbrook from Baton Rouge. Holbrook, a Union veteran, was troubled by what he found. The victims were all knights who had participated in documented violence against freedmen, and the notes referenced specific crimes federal investigators had tried and failed to prosecute. Marshal Holbrook's investigation confirmed Celeste Dufresne as the likely killer of at least 3 knights, but she had vanished without a trace. Holbrook then took the unusual step of interviewing the freedmen's community, not as suspects, but as witnesses. An elderly deacon named Isaiah gave the marshal the critical piece of insight. "You're looking for one woman. You think one person could move through this parish killing white men and not be caught? I'm saying that when the law fails people, they find other ways, other means." It was a silent admission that the freedmen's community was protecting the killer, or killers, viewing the murders as justice delayed. Holbrook, unable to prosecute without triggering massive racial violence or admitting the complete breakdown of civilian government, filed a report naming Celeste Dufresne as a transient criminal who had fled the jurisdiction. He abandoned the remaining knights to their fate. The 6 surviving knights, Jessup, Thibodeau, Judge Teo, Sheriff Devo, Duplantis, and Arseno, understood they were abandoned. They turned their homes into fortresses, buying more weapons and moving only in groups. But the relentless pressure broke them. The murders continued. William Duplantis was killed in his study on October 1st, the note referencing his role in the Christmas massacre of 1868 against freedmen voters. Charles Arseno followed 2 weeks later on October 15th, killed in his own warehouse with a note referencing wage theft. 7 men were dead. The survivors were cracking. Thibodeau barricaded himself in his home, drinking. Judge Teo moved his family out of the parish. Sheriff Devo, the only one maintaining a routine, noticed the pattern. Each death occurred exactly 2 weeks after the previous one. The next death was due on October 29th. Devo convinced the remaining 4 leaders to break the pattern by fortifying themselves in the parish courthouse, a supposed fortress, on October 28th. They planned to wait out the deadline, believing their psychological advantage would be restored. They were playing directly into the killer's hands. While the knights planned their defense, Celeste, La Vie Noire, met with her network in the small house behind the freedmen's church. This network included Marie, the serving girl, Charlotte, the decoy, Isaiah, the deacon, and other men and women who had lost family to the night's violence. "They think they can wait us out," Celeste said. "They don't understand that this was never about timing or opportunity. This was always about justice." She unveiled a crucial weakness in the courthouse, one they had forgotten about. The coal chute running from the basement to the street, barely wide enough for a person, but enough. In the small house behind the church, Celeste, now stripped of the Madame Dufresne persona and hardened into an instrument of vengeance, met with her network, including Marie, Charlotte, and Deacon Isaiah. When Isaiah urged her to stop, saying she had done enough, Celeste replied with cold finality, My mother died, begging them for mercy. Did they show her any? This ends when they're all dead, Isaiah, not before. On October 28th, the 4 remaining knights, Jessup, Thibodeau, Judge Teo, and Sheriff Devo, fortified themselves in the parish courthouse with 8 armed guards, believing they were as safe here as we'll ever be. They waited out the night, oblivious to the quiet anticipation in the colored section of town. At midnight, Celeste, now wearing dark, practical clothes, slipped away. The coal chute grate came off with surprising ease, and she dropped silently into the dark basement, successfully infiltrating the fortress that the guards were only watching from the outside. She moved with practiced silence, utilizing her knowledge of the building's squeaks and shadows. Understanding that the knights were expecting an attack from a mob or a direct assault, not from someone already within their walls, someone they considered beneath notice. She reached the main courtroom, hearing the nervous laughter and false bravado of the 4 men inside. She checked her bag. The knife, the 4 pre-written notes, the chloroform, and the creased photograph of her mother, Sarah Budrow. Sarah, who had trusted the law and was murdered for that trust. Celeste knew this was never about survival. It was about balance and ensuring her mother's death had consequences. Just after 2 in the morning, when exhaustion had set in, Celeste stepped into the courtroom through the unlocked clerk's office door. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said quietly. Sheriff Devo was the first to speak. "Madame Dufresne, or should I call you something else?" "My name," Celeste replied calmly, "is Josephine Budrow. I am the daughter of Sarah and Marcus Boudreau, who you murdered in 1868. I have come to collect the debt you owe my family." The remaining knights realized they had profoundly underestimated her. She had breached their stronghold, walking into the heart of their defense, unarmed and unafraid. She had already won the psychological war, proving that justice could come from below, through the forgotten channels and invisible people they had spent their lives ignoring. Judge Teo frantically ordered the guards to arrest her, but they hesitated. Josephine stood there, purposeful and in control, a symbol of unavoidable consequence. "You can try to take me," she challenged. Josephine Boudreau stood before the 4 remaining knights, delivering a lie that was nonetheless potent. "If I don't walk out of this courthouse alive, they have instructions to burn this building to the ground with all of you inside it." The knights, knowing the colored population significantly outnumbered them, understood they were cornered. "I want you to understand why you're going to die," Josephine stated. "This is justice. Imperfect, delayed, outside the law because the law failed us." She then methodically recounted every crime the knights had committed over 4 years, citing names, dates, and locations with the precision of a court document. The men listened with overwhelming horror, finally confronting the mountain of suffering they had created. Desperate, Judge Teo tried to regain control. "You're confessing. We have witnesses." Josephine smiled. "Then arrest me. Put me on trial. Let me testify in court about everything I've just said. Let's have a public trial where all of this comes to light." The judge fell silent, realizing a public trial would expose the entire apparatus of terror and destroy them completely. Josephine offered an option, though she knew they wouldn't take it. Confess publicly and face trial, or take their chances against her. When Jessup raised the threat of executing her, she reminded him of the federal scrutiny and the inevitable revenge from the freedmen's community that would follow. Judge Teot finally collapsed, exhausted and beaten. "She's right. We have no good options. We never did. Maybe this is just the bill finally coming due." Sheriff Devo, however, drew his pistol, maintaining his role. "You're under arrest for the murders of 7 men. Before the violence could escalate, a new sound filled the courthouse: singing. Dozens of voices rose from the square outside. Freed men and women had gathered with torches and lanterns, singing hymns. They hadn't come to attack. They had come to bear witness, making it clear that Josephine Boudreau did not stand alone. Devo lowered his weapon. He was defeated. He couldn't shoot Josephine without triggering a riot, nor could he arrest her without guaranteeing federal intervention. Dawn broke over Bro Bridge on October 29th. The confrontation ended, not in violence, but in a strange negotiation. Josephine walked out of the courthouse at sunrise, having secured something more valuable than revenge: acknowledgement. Judge Te'o had written and signed a full confession detailing every crime committed by the Knights of the White Camellia. This document would never be filed in court but would be held by the freedmen's community as a sword held perpetually over the heads of the men. In exchange, Josephine agreed to leave Louisiana, never return, and not kill the remaining Knights unless they resumed their terror. She agreed to disappear, allowing her story to become legend rather than documented fact. The outcome of the courthouse confrontation was not justice, not truly. 3 men who deserved to hang would live out their natural lives, unpunished by law. But it was acknowledgement of guilt and a permanent, fear-driven reminder that their actions had consequences. The 4 surviving Knights never recovered. Judge Te'o resigned, moved to Texas, and died 2 years later from despair. Sheriff Devo lost his re-election. Harold Jessup left the state. The Ku Klux Klan's power in St. Martin Parish fragmented and faded because the certainty that violence would go unpunished was broken. The specific reign of terror that defined the post-war years finally ended. Josephine Boudreaux, the instrument of vengeance, disappeared. The truth was simple. She moved to New York, changed her name again, and spent the rest of her life working with organizations that supported freedmen's rights, using her intelligence to help others navigate post-war America. She never spoke publicly about Breaux Bridge. She lived quietly, modestly, until her death in 1903 at age 47, buried in an unmarked grave in Brooklyn. In Louisiana's colored communities, the story of La Vie Noire was passed down through generations, becoming part of the secret history of resistance and survival. Though details became embellished, the core remained constant. A woman whose family was destroyed had killed the killers and shown that even the most powerful men were vulnerable to consequences. Historians would later debate her existence, as the signed confession was never officially found and Celeste Dufresne left no trace. But the absence of documentation, as the legend reminds us, does not mean the absence of truth. In a time when justice for freedmen existed only in theory, stories like La Vie Noire served a crucial purpose. They reminded people that resistance was possible, that patience and planning could accomplish what law and government could not. 7 men died, their crimes finally answered. 4 survived, but never recovered. And Josephine Boudreaux found a measure of peace, knowing that her mother's murder had been avenged, and that justice, imperfect and bloody and outside the law, had been served. What do you think of this story? Could something like this have really happened in Reconstruction Louisiana? Do you believe that revenge can ever equal justice, or does it just perpetuate the cycle of violence? Leave your comment below. I read every single one and I want to know what you think. If you made it this far, if this story moved you or terrified you, subscribe to The Forgotten Liturgy and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who appreciates dark true crime and forgotten history.